Irelu, good morning, and thank you for that warm welcome. And good morning to every member of the audience. I'm privileged to be delivering the Keynote paper this morning. And by way of introduction, Dele Ogun is my name. I'm a historian, a lawyer, author, the convener of the Fatherland Group, which is a multi-ethnic group of Nigerians both home and in the diaspora. I'm also the chairman of the Yoruba Foundation. What I propose to speak to this morning to begin with is the concept of the Yoruba nation. Because we're often asked, what makes a nation? And I want to share this with you. It's a quotation that I came across fairly recently, that a nation is not a place, it is an emotion. Let me say that again. A nation is not a place, it is an emotion. Now, the significance of this definition is as follows. There are periods in history when nations disappear off the map. But the fact that they've disappeared off a particular map does not mean that that nation has ceased to exist. It still is, because it is not a place. The mere fact that you cannot look at a map and say, there is the Yoruba nation, does not mean that the Yoruba nation ceased to exist or does not exist. Let me illustrate that by reference to the history of Poland. Poland is a country, when you look at some of the maps of Europe before 1918, you would not find Poland on a map. But will it be said that the Polish people and the Polish nation did not exist? Where did they go? It was simply a product of geopolitics that Poland was carved up between the Germans and the Russians and other European powers, and so was eliminated from the map. But in 1918, following the end of the First World War, Poland resurfaced and took its place amongst the League of Nations. I don't use League of Nations in the sense of the technical term. In lowercase, amongst the community of nations, it returned. What about the state of Israel? I think we're more familiar with that story, where a nation disappeared off the map of the world. But did the Israelis cease to be Israelis all that time, since the Exodus and the expulsion? But I came back onto the world map after the Second World War. They returned in 1948, and now we speak boldly of the nation of Israel. So as it was for the Poles, and as it was for the Israelis, so it is for the Yoruba nation. Yoruba nation only came off the map because the Nigeria construct imposed itself in that political space, such that those who are looking for the Yoruba nation as a place will tell you that, it's a fiction of the imagination, it does not exist. But when they say that, point to the examples that I've given you. And please, I want you to go and spend time to read into, in particular, the experience of Poland. And it will underline the point that I'm seeking to make. So the Yoruba nation is very much alive and very much with us. We're now in a situation where Nigeria has been put in its place. But for how long? Because you see, the fraud that is Nigeria has been exposed and is becoming apparent, I say, to everyone but the willfully blind, that this construct that was put there by the British was put there for a purpose, just as the construct that was put in place of Poland. But it's in the nature of these constructs that they only endure as long as they are intrinsically strong and serve the interests of the people over which they subsist. The Nigerian construct has clearly demonstrated that it does not serve the interests of not just the Yoruba, but the peoples of Nigeria. Because we're not alone in this journey. It's a journey in which our people seek fulfillment of their purpose on this earth. Their purpose on this earth is not to be constrained by the artificial construct called Nigeria, where we cannot live according to the values that were handed down to us by our fathers and our mothers. The Omoluabi culture, the principles. We now have a situation where strangers are in our homes and putting their feet up on our chairs. And when we ask them politely to leave, they insult us and say that they are the owners of our homes. How did we get to this position? From the proud nation that we were, not just a nation, an empire. And now those same peoples are referred to as a tribe. How does an empire become a tribe? Ask yourself. Except in the minds of those who wish to belittle you, who wish to make you a dwarf where you are in actual fact a giant, because you're relying on other people's description of you. If an evaluation of a human being was dependent upon what others thought rather than what you yourself think of yourselves, think how small and diminished you would be. So we have a situation where strangers with impunity are now coming into our homes and doing what they like, putting their feet up on our chairs and on our tables, and we sit and watch. How did we get to this situation? The answer is simple. It is bad leadership. It's as simple as that. It is bad leadership. The position of a leader is a custodian, taking responsibility, telling those who he or she is leading to stand back and leave it to us. We will take you in the direction that will secure your interests. That's what leadership is. And so when we have a situation such as we have, the fault lies not with our Yoruba people. It lies fully and squarely with the leaders. They must look at themselves. And you see, the leaders come in different categories. and all departments have failed. You have what I call the political or professional politicians. I emphasize the word professional because they're there for the salary. They're there for the remuneration packages. They're there for the pension benefits. Theirs is not a calling to politics. It's a job application. It's the remuneration packages and the benefits in kind and the trappings of office that they're pursuing. These are not conviction politicians. Conviction politicians feel a calling. They respond to situations and events. They are selfless in their purpose. But not just the politicians. What about our military generals? We have many of them. Yet we have a situation where our homelands, our villages, our frontiers have been walked through as if there were nothing there. Yes, there were generals in the Nigerian army. But what about the Yoruba side of them? To keep an eye on the homeland, even whilst they're pursuing the agenda of Nigeria. Should they not have been sounding the alarm bells? Is security not supposed to be their concern? Is it just the security of Nigeria and not the security of their fatherland, Yoruba land? So we have generals, and yet we're in this situation. And what about the traditional rulers? These are leaders, traditional leaders. But it's under their watch that we're in this situation that we're in now. And we have many of them. Who were they leading? What were they leading to allow this situation to become as it is? That even within the 22 tribes of the Yoruba, that's where you use the language tribe properly, because the nation is Yoruba. The country is Nigeria. The tribes of the Yoruba are the Ijebu, the AGBA, the Ekiti, the Ikale. Those are the tribes. And even as we were, when we were a Yoruba nation, I assure you that if there was a sudden influx of Ijebu people into Ikale land, or Ikale land, Ikale people into Ijebu land, there will be concern on the part of the traditional rulers. So what's going on? Yet we have a situation where complete strangers whose languages are not intelligible to us in any shape or form, bar the English language that connects us, and some of them can't even speak the language, and wander into our areas, disturbing our farmlands and raping our women, under the watch of our traditional rulers. And what about the intellectuals? What about all the professors and the master's holders and the graduates and whatnots that we boast so much of? So much education, the most educated peoples in Africa. How has that education served us where we're in a situation where people are now roaming our lands with impunity? There's a common denominator in all of this. It is the fraud of one Nigeria. They all bought into this one Nigeria narrative. The professional politicians, the generals, the traditional rulers, the intellectuals, they all bought into the one Nigeria deception. Because the reality is this that's become apparent now. The one Nigeria only ever meant the partnership between the British and the Fulani. That is the reality. It is that partnership, senior partner and junior partner. That was the One Nigeria project, and it's now becoming manifest to all but the willfully blind. This was the project. A unitary structure where the nations, the component nations, are simply erased and wiped out. As opposed to how we were before the colonials, these outsiders, both Fulani and British, they came in at the same time. Trace their history. The jihad was 1804 in Uthman Danfodio's jihad against the Fulani, the House of Kingdoms, 1804. 1800s also is when the British so-called explorers started wandering across our land. And look at the strategy, it's the same. The so-called explorers came in, oh, we're just explorers, wanted to find out where the rivers flow and, you know, which road leads to where. Just like the herdsmen, not so. Just herding their cattle everywhere. That's their sole purpose. But it was simply a cover for an agenda. Until the agenda then becomes manifest and it becomes too late for everybody to react. So that's where the failing came from. And what is the response? What should be our response? Where are the leaders going to emerge from? Well, a gentleman came out very recently. I hadn't heard of him before. Mr. Sunday Igboho. He came out in response to what he saw. You know, I spoke earlier of the difference between professional politicians, the wage earners and salary seekers, as against the conviction politicians, those who respond to a calling. Sunday Igboho was responding to what he saw. The impunity, the callous and evil and wicked murders, the casual raping of women on their farmlands, to which nobody was responding, the leaders. Yes, the people were speaking, the people were grumbling, but the leadership, who should have been speaking, their voice was not heard. And he was the still small voice in relative terms that came out, that was heard so clearly and so courageously. That's what I mean by conviction politicians, and politicians who are politicians because of a calling, not because of a job application. Now, I want to say something about this term Fulani herdsmen. Please, let's stop using that herdsman tag. They're not herdsmen. They're Fulani men who are murdering and raping and conducting themselves with such impunity. The herdsmen are the herdsmen. The rapists are the rapists, and the murderers are the murderers. Let's stop hiding them behind the tag Fulani herdsmen. Let's call things as they are. These are Fulani men. And as we know, many of them are not even of our Nigeria space. They say it openly. They don't respect boundaries. A Fulani is a Fulani, whether it's from the Senegambia area or our space. These people do not respect front doors being closed. They believe that all rooms should be accessible by them and do what they like. That cannot be tolerated by any self-respecting peoples. So what is the way forward? It is simple. We must organize in order to survive. We must all be a Sunday Igboho in our homes, in our neighborhoods, in our villages, in our communities, because the conventional and formal leadership having failed us and brought us into this situation, it is now a matter of self-help. It is no longer for the professional politicians. It is beyond them. It is now everyone is a Sunday Igboho until this crisis is over. Erelu, I thank you. Erelu, thank you so very much for organizing this event. It's been a fantastic discussion. I've learned a lot from many of the speakers. I'm going to run through very quickly some of the comments that I heard. I'll work backwards. Let me start with my friend Yomi Bola. Yes, I agree with him to an extent about talking as against action. However, there's a danger in that narrative that I hear often, that we talk too much. Action must be informed action. You're only going to get the right action if you brainstorm and put your heads together and you talk. So the problem is not talking. The problem is not listening and not talking about the right things. I agree with him that the diaspora must support those on the ground. That is vitally important. Those on the ground are like those on a ship that is sinking, and it's those on dry land that have the opportunity to send the rescue boats in. So the responsibility is on we in the diaspora to help those on the ground. From that, I'll take on his last point about don't unite with other tribes. That is wrong. No war, and we are in a war situation. No war is fought in isolation. When you have a situation where there's a common enemy, it is folly to say that you would not join hands with those who are facing the same threats. You only need to look at the history of the West and their wars. Russia and Britain, arch enemies to this very day. But check the First World War and the Second World War. Which side were they on? They were on the same side. So identify your common interests and then work from there. You can't fight everybody at the same time. If you have no allies, that is the pathway to destruction. Princess Moyo, I very much appreciated her reference to the native Indian experience, how they were wiped out in South America, in the Caribbean, and in Australia. Very, very valid point. Somehow we seem to think that it won't happen to us, that we were somehow, or we are somehow better than those peoples. The lessons of history are there for us to learn from. Our fortune, where we're fortunate, is that we have a chance to take the lessons of history on board, to ensure that what happened to the native Indians of all those places will not happen to us. So I thank her for that reminder. And she said, how do we prepare for war, which is already here? That is actually the tragedy. It is already here. It is not when they say we are at war that the war begins. It's by the actions that you know them. And the tragedy is that by virtue of this Nigerian experience, we're in a worse position to defend ourselves than we were when we had the Yoruba nation. That is a reality. Somebody else touched on that. I think it was Yemi Adelakun. We don't have weapons, he said. And I made a note saying, contrast when we were a Yoruba nation and empire. We had our own weaponry. Nobody could treat us with such impunity. Even if it's bows and arrows, we had them. Now we don't even have that. And then we're barred from carrying guns. So we have to go back to basics. Shola Oni, again, it goes to show that the common theme that came through. He said, what the Fulani could not do when we were Yoruba nation, Nigeria has made it possible for them. And he's so right. The Fulani advance, as I said in my opening submission, was simply a continuation of the partnership between the British and the Fulani. And they've made the headway that they could not have made, but for one Nigeria, which caused everybody to drop their guard. Turning to Michael Olatubosun, he said we need to clarify the role of the traditional rulers. And that is so right. What exactly do they do? All these Kabiasis, what do they do to earn that title and the respect that they call for from the people? I touched on it in my opening submissions. That is their failings. And they must face up to their failings. That has put their people, our people, in the situation of such vulnerability. They need to be held to account, not just now, but going forward. Every office that demands reverence and respect must have a duty sheet, what we can expect back from them in return. I then turned to Mr. Tokumbo Adeniran. I so enjoyed both his presentations, his contributions. It simply goes to show that when we talk about elders and we talk about wisdom, we think that it's simply a function of the number of years we spend on this earth. It is not. If there's one thing that I've learned from the West, it is that they find wisdom even in the youngest people. And they're ready for those young ones to lead the way. The Prime Minister of Britain, at the time when they made their greatest advances, was a 24-year-old man. 24-year-old William Pitt, the younger. Check the history books, check it out. We will hear, or we'll be in a gathering where there'll be young people amongst us, and we don't want to hear them. The elders say, do you know my age? Do you know who I am? There's enough of that nonsense. I heard such wisdom from Tokes this morning. He talked about the endless loop of nothing, and that's precisely the situation that we're in. He said you cannot look to the entity Nigeria for the solution when it itself is the problem, is the virus, and you're looking to the problem to provide us the solution. It cannot work. Brilliant insights. Finally, I think, no, it was Lady Clara who said, raised the issue as to why there's no law as to, in respect of all these Fulani crimes. Well, the answer is that the law is not a problem of a shortage of laws. As a lawyer, I know the situation. The laws are there. It's a question of enforcement and the political will to enforce it. You have a Fulani commander, jihadist, who his agenda is clear. is the advancement of his Fulani people at the expense of everybody else. That is why the laws have not been enforced. It's not the absence of laws or the shortage of laws. It is the political will to do the right thing. And in those circumstances, then you have to defend yourself. The Yoruba have to rise to their own salvation if you cannot look to salvation from the Nigerian entity. And then Tinu, who spoke after me, talked about Africans are a migrating species in terms of seeking to justify the African Union and the migration of Fulani here, there, and everywhere. I'm afraid I have to disagree. Human beings are migrating. All humans migrate. There's nothing peculiar to Africans. But they migrate either with a benign purpose in mind or a malicious agenda in mind. Conquistadors, those who conquered South America and destroyed the native Indians, they were migrants. But the kind of migrants that we should open our doors to are those who are prepared to live by our ways. We're not going to put their feet on our chairs when we let them in. We're not going to rape our women. We're not going to disrespect our land. Those ones, you must close the door firmly. And this is why Erelu is so right as regards the Pan-Africanism and the Africa Union agenda. It is a nonsense. It is inviting us to vote for our own destruction, to let everybody in. Look at Brexit. What was that about? These are advanced countries. In Europe, they're all democracies. Who needs anything from anywhere? Living standards are the same, high standard. But they knew that you cannot leave your borders open. Why did they not let Turkey into the European Union? If it's just a question of human beings all coming together and being happy families. They know that there are boundaries. Nature knows their boundaries. When we were created different. The problem is not difference. It is resenting difference. Resenting difference to the extent of trying to make us one. We must celebrate difference. And we must celebrate our identity as Yoruba people before anything else. Erelu, again, I thank you very much for the opportunity.